She locked 23 overseers in the gin and lit the fuse. That part of the story spread fast through the sugar parishes, but few knew what the county physician found beneath the charred boards, shackles still clasped, bones blackened clean, a list of names burned but not lost. The gin stood at the edge of a once prosperous plantation where muddy boots lined up neatly outside the manor, and never moved again. What no one expected was the handwriting, precise, feminine, unmistakably educated, found inside a tin box, hidden just inches from the ash. Was it revenge, or a record of justice the courts never dared keep? If you would like me to continue creating stories so that this history, which is not taught in schools, is not forgotten, please subscribe to this channel. Write in the comments where you are watching from. The spring heat pressed down on Sheriff Daniel Harrow as he guided his horse along the rutted road leading to the Charbonneau plantation. The telegram had arrived just after noon, its terse message typical of Etienne's aristocratic brevity. Missing overseer. Fire damage. Immediate attention required. Harrow's coat, heavy with pipe ash and river damp, clung to his shoulders as he approached the gin house. The structure loomed against the setting sun, its weather-beaten boards a patchwork of old and new timber. Two field hands paused in their work to watch him pass, their hose suspended mid-strike. The acrid smell hit him first, not the clean char of pine smoke, but something deeper and fouler that seemed to seep from the very ground. Etienne Charbonneau stood waiting, his white moustache precisely trimmed despite the afternoon's humidity, a wide-brimmed hat shading his eyes. "Sheriff," Etienne nodded, maintaining his practiced plantation drawl. "We discovered it this morning. Samuel Lorne, one of our newer overseers, failed to report for roll call. The pulley system shows signs of tampering. Inside the gin house, shadows played across scorched beams near the drum mechanism. Harrow ran his fingers along the blackened wood, coming away with greasy soot. When was he last seen? Yesterday evening. He stayed to adjust the drums. Etienne's boots creaked on the floorboards. These installations require constant maintenance. Dr. Howard Greaves arrived as Harrow was examining the rope ends, his medical satchel swinging from ink-stained fingers. The physician's pince-nez caught the fading light as he stooped to study the burned hemp, measuring the char pattern with a ruler he produced from his vest pocket. "Clean cuts beneath the burn marks," Greaves observed, his voice carrying the clipped precision of his northern education. "The fire appears concentrated, deliberate rather than accidental spread." He made careful notes in a small leather journal. The stench grew stronger as they moved deeper into the building. Harrow knelt, pressing his palm against the floorboards. Warm air seeped through the gaps, carrying that peculiar reek. "What's beneath here?" "Storage space," Etienne replied quickly, "for excess cotton seed during the grinding season." Dr. Greaves had moved to the mechanical housing, his methodical inspection halting at the crankshaft. With tweezers, he extracted something wedged behind the metal frame, a curved piece of leather, charred black along one edge. "Boot sole fragment," he announced, holding it to the light. "Quality work. Note the double stitching along the welt. American-made, not French import." He placed it carefully in a glass specimen jar. "I'll have my apprentice check with the parish cobblers." This level of craftsmanship narrows our search considerably. Harrow watched the physician's precise movements, noting how he labeled the jar with time and location before tucking it into his satchel. The sheriff's own logbook remained closed. There was too little yet to document, only questions multiplying in the heavy Delta air. The sun had nearly set, casting long shadows through the gin house doors. Etienne cleared his throat. Surely this is a simple matter of dereliction. These northern overseers often lack the constitution for our climate. But Harrow's attention had returned to the floorboards, to that strange warmth seeping up through the cracks, carrying its burden of secrets into the gathering dark. Dawn light filtered through the dusty windows of Théophile Dubois' cobbler shop in Grande Prairie. The boot-sole fragment lay on his worn workbench, its charred edge stark against the scarred wood. Sheriff Harrow watched as the old craftsman's fingers traced the double stitching with practiced precision. American leather, oak-tanned. Dubois squinted through his brass-rimmed spectacles. Custom work, this was. Made it myself for that overseer fellow, Lorne. Samuel Lorne. He shuffled through a stack of receipt cards, pulling one marked with precise French script. Ordered 6 pairs last February, paid in Union greenbacks, not parish scrip. Harrow noted the details in his logbook, the pages already spotted with morning dew. "You're certain?" "See here." Dubois pointed to a distinctive pattern along the welt. "My mark. Every pair I made him had it. Man wanted sturdy boots for field work. Said the Mississippi mud was different from Louisiana muck. The morning sun had climbed higher by the time Harrow's horse turned onto the Charbonneau estate's main drive. The mansion rose before him, its columned facade betraying patches of war-scorched brick beneath fresh whitewash. Etienne and Rosalie Charbonneau received him in their front parlor, where heavy drapes filtered the light to a dim green haze. Rosalie perched on a faded settee, her face composed behind a painted fan despite the early hour. Missing, Etienne's moustache twitched. Lorne was a drinker, Sheriff, fond of that Creole whiskey they serve down in Cypress Hollow, probably sleeping off a bender in some backwater tavern. Or fled his debts, Rosalie added, her fan moving in precise arcs. These northern men often arrive with complications. A floorboard creaked in the hallway. Josephine stood there, a coffee service balanced on a silver tray. She moved into the room with measured steps, her neat dress and silver hair comb a studied picture of domestic service. Steam rose from the china cups as she poured, her movements efficient and silent. "The estate's labor ledger," Harrow said, accepting a cup without drinking. "I'll need to review it." Etienne's hesitation lasted only a moment. "Josephine, fetch the accounts from my study." She returned with a leather-bound volume, its corners worn smooth with handling. Harrow opened it across his knees, pages crackling as he turned to March's entries. The careful columns of numbers and names ended abruptly at March's 3rd week. Ragged edges showed where pages had been torn free. These missing pages, Harrow looked up. When were they removed? "Damage from the recent storms," Etienne replied smoothly. "Water seepage in the study." We had to discard several ruined sheets. Harrow continued turning pages, stopping at a partially burned entry from late March. There, in precise handwriting, Ebrand, 3 shifts unpaid. "I'll need to retain this ledger," he said, closing the book firmly, "for comparison with parish records." Etienne's jaw tightened, but his plantation manners held. "As you wish, Sheriff." Though I fail to see the relevance to a simple case of employee departure. Josephine collected the empty coffee cups, her movements as silent as before. In the hallway's shadows, she paused, watching with that same unreadable expression as Harrow tucked the ledger into his saddlebag. The pounding on Sheriff Harrow's door cut through the midnight silence. 3 sharp raps, then silence, then more urgent beating. Harrow grabbed his coat and pistol, swinging open the heavy oak door to find Dre Lowry trembling on his porch, hat crushed between calloused hands. "Sheriff," Dre's voice cracked. "The gin house. Something ain't right. Heard it groaning and screaming, then just quiet." Too quiet. Harrow studied the field hand's face in the dim porch light. Dre's good foot shifted nervously while his twisted one remained planted, a legacy of a wagon accident years back. Sweat gleamed on his forehead despite the cool night air. When? Harrow reached for his lantern. Not 20 minutes past. Was checking the water barrel by the slave quarters. Dre caught himself. The freedmen's lodging when I heard it. Sounded like... He shuddered. Like nothing natural, sir. Harrow's horse knew the route to Charbonneau's plantation, even in darkness. The gin house loomed against the star-filled sky, its pulley tower a black finger pointing accusingly heavenward. No smoke, no flame, no movement visible from the outside. "Stay here," Harrow told Dre, dismounting with lantern in hand. The horse snorted nervously, pawing the packed earth. Behind the smokehouse, bootprints scuffed the soil. Harrow's lantern beam caught the metallic glint of a shovel lying half-hidden in the weeds. Dark stains marked its blade and handle, still wet to the touch. Blood. A strip of fabric, no wider than a finger, snagged on a nail near the smokehouse door. The cloth was stiff with something black, soot or ash. Following its direction, Harrow found more scraps leading toward the cane fields. The stalks stood silent, undisturbed in the night breeze. "Anything missing from inside?" he called to Dre, who had limped closer despite orders. "No, sir. Checked the tools myself. Everything's where it should be." Harrow circled the gin house twice more, finding no forced entry, no broken windows, no signs of fire. Yet something had happened here. The air held a thickness, like the weighted silence after a thunderclap. Dawn was still hours away when Harrow knocked at the main house. Etienne Charbonneau appeared in his nightshirt, looking more irritated than concerned. "A disturbance?" "Impossible. We've had no—" "Where's Josephine?" Harrow cut in. Etienne blinked. "Asleep in her quarters, naturally." "Check." Rosalie Charbonneau led them to the small room off the kitchen where Josephine slept. The bed was made, undisturbed, no personal items visible except the silver comb on a small table. "She sometimes walks at night," Rosalie offered quickly. The war left many restless habits. Back in his office before first light, Harrow drafted his report to Judge Baird. His pen scratched across official letterhead. "Request formal authorization to investigate off-grounds movement of estate personnel and seize remaining account ledgers from Charbonneau Plantation. Evidence suggests coordinated activity involving gin house premises. 2 overseers missing. Blood evidence discovered. Witness testimony indicates suspicious nighttime disturbance. Key domestic servant unaccounted for during incident." He paused, then added, "Local tensions warrant immediate attention." Dr. Howard Greaves arrived at the gin house with William Porter, the saint. Landry County surveyor, just as the morning fog began lifting from the fields. Porter carried his brass transit and measuring chain, while Greaves clutched his ever-present medical satchel, now containing an iron probe borrowed from the parish mortuary. "Notice the settling pattern," Porter said, pointing to where the central support beam met the floorboards. "These planks have dropped nearly half an inch on either side." Greaves knelt, pressing his ear to the wooden floor. The boards felt warm despite the morning chill. He removed the iron probe from his bag and began tapping methodically, starting from the outer wall and working inward in a grid pattern. Each strike produced a dull thud until he reached the center. Tap, tap, a hollow echo answered back. "There," Greaves said, marking the spot with chalk. "Again here." He moved the probe 2 feet left. The same resonant sound replied. Porter unrolled a sheet of drafting paper across a work table, sketching the gin house's dimensions. His pencil traced the main support beams, the pulley system above, and the strange void they'd discovered below. The space extends at least 8 feet in each direction from the center point, Porter measured, consulting his chain. Far too large to be natural settling. Greaves crouched to examine the floorboards more closely. Black residue caked the seams between planks, different from the usual cotton dust. He scraped a sample into a glass vial, holding it to the light. "Charcoal," he muttered, "but look how it's pushed upward through the gaps." The fire source was below, not above. The physician's thin fingers moved across the floor, finding more evidence with each pass. Circular marks where ropes might have been threaded through. Iron stains that could be rust, or something else. He added each detail to Porter's growing diagram. "The depth, though," Porter said, frowning at his calculations. "If this was some kind of grain silo or storage pit, why hide it? And why seal it completely?" Greaves didn't answer. He was studying the pulley system overhead, noting how the main drive shaft aligned perfectly with the hollow space below. His pencil sketched quick additions to Porter's diagram, dotted lines suggesting a trap mechanism, counterweights, a chute wide enough for... He stopped drawing abruptly. "We should deliver this to the sheriff," Greaves said, rolling the diagram carefully. "And I suggest bringing lanterns for tomorrow's inspection." The space below will be quite dark. In his office, Greaves transcribed his findings in precise script. April 17th, 1868. Gin House examination notes. Hollow chamber detected beneath central floor section, approximately 8 feet by 8 feet, minimum dimension. Evidence of concealed trap mechanism, utilizing existing pulley system, charcoal residue, present between boards. Sample retained, burn patterns, indicate fire originated in subfloor chamber. Multiple rope marks observed around perimeter of affected area. Recommend immediate excavation, with witness documentation. He sealed the notes and diagram in an envelope marked "Urgent," and dispatched his apprentice to deliver them to Sheriff Harrow's office. The sun had climbed higher, burning away the last wisps of morning fog. In the distance, the gin house stood silent, keeping its darker secrets for a few hours more. The first rays of sunlight hadn't yet touched the fields when Sheriff Harrow's team gathered at the gin house. 4 deputies wielded iron crowbars while Dr. Greaves stood ready with his medical kit. The morning air hung thick with dew and anticipation. "Start at the marked section," Harrow directed, pointing to Greaves's chalk outlines. "Careful now. We document everything exactly as we find it." The crowbars bit into ancient wood with groaning protests. Splinters flew as the deputies worked methodically, prying up board after board. The exposed joists revealed layers of packed earth and debris beneath, except for one square section that rang hollow when struck. "Here," Deputy Mills called out, his crowbar hitting something metallic. "There's some kind of panel." They cleared away more flooring, revealing a crude trap door, roughly 6 feet square. Its surface was covered with a thick layer of crushed cane stalks and charred burlap sacks, still bearing the faint stamp of Louisiana prime sugar. "Stand back," Harrow ordered, pulling his bandana over his nose. 2 deputies gripped the trapdoor's iron ring and heaved. The stench hit them like a physical force. Several men staggered backward, gagging. Even Dr. Greaves, hardened by years in the parish morgue, pressed a chloroform-soaked cloth to his face. "Dear Lord in heaven," someone whispered. The pit below was a charnel house. Skeletal remains lay tangled with rusted chains and manacles, some fused together by intense heat. Harrow counted at least 6 distinct skulls visible in the weak morning light that now penetrated the chamber. "Get Reverend Dunn," Harrow managed through his bandana, "and bring my writing desk. This needs proper documentation." The Reverend arrived within the hour. His tall frame stooped as he peered into the pit. He made the sign of the cross and began murmuring prayers while Dr. Greaves carefully catalogued each visible bone and artifact. "Sheriff," Greaves called, holding up a corroded metal tag with needle-nose pliers. "There's something stamped here." Harrow leaned closer, squinting at the oxidized surface. 2 letters remained barely legible. W.L. Reverend Dunn's breath caught. "Wallace Lichter," he said quietly. "He came seeking work last December. I remember because he attended Christmas service before starting at the plantation." The Reverend's fingers worried at his worn Bible. "He disappeared in February. The Charbonneaus said he'd moved on to Baton Rouge." As the morning wore on, workers carefully removed debris from around the pit's edges. Deputy Collins spotted something glinting in the soil, a scorched tin case about the size of a man's hand, its lid warped by heat. Inside, most papers had crumbled to ash, but one fragment remained partially intact. The handwriting was elegant, distinctly French in its flowing script. Harrow held it carefully to the light, making out 2 lines. "They whipped and laughed. Now they lie." The sheriff placed the paper fragment in an evidence envelope, his hand steady but his face grim. Above them, the gin house's pulley drums cast long shadows across the scene, like gallows frames waiting in judgment. The tailor from Vicksburg arrived as shadows lengthened across the parish square. Thomas Blackwood, a thin man with measuring tape draped around his neck, carried a leather portfolio stuffed with wrinkled papers. Sheriff Harrow cleared space on his desk as Blackwood extracted a yellow document. "I remember the day clear as spring water," Blackwood said, smoothing the paper. "February of '66, a widow, Mrs. Catherine Beaumont, came to have her husband's will notarized. Her witness was a colored woman who wrote with uncommon grace. He placed the will beside the burned fragment from the tin case. Same hand, Sheriff? Those swooping L's, the way she crosses her T's with a slight rightward tick. That's Josephine Charbonneau's writing, sure as Sunday." Harrow studied the matching scripts through his brass-rimmed spectacles. "You're certain of the name?" "Had to ask her to spell it twice. Seemed proud of it, too. Left you impression, seeing a former slave write better than most white folks I knew." As they spoke, Deputy Mills burst in, still winded from his surveillance route. "Sheriff, you need to hear this. Been following the woman like you asked. She was at market, carrying this big iron kettle. Then clear as day, she just dropped it. Scalding water everywhere. Burned her palm something fierce." Mills leaned closer, lowering his voice. "But she didn't make a sound. Not a whimper. Just wrapped her hand in her apron and walked home calm as could be." Harrow's jaw tightened. He was about to respond when heavy boots thundered up the office steps. 2 field hands carried a third between them, Jerome Watson, one of the newer freedmen workers. Blood matted his temple. "Found him by the gin house," one said, laying Jerome on the wooden bench. "Been beaten bad." Dr. Greaves arrived minutes later, his medical bag already open. As he cleaned the wound, Jerome's eyes fluttered. His words came in ragged whispers. "Saw her, that night, when Lorne disappeared." He coughed, his voice barely audible. "Woman in the shadows. Pushed him. Down the floor chute." Then the smoke came. Harrow knelt beside him. "What woman, Jerome?" "Did you see her face?" "Too dark. But her hand." His breathing grew labored. "Ring caught the moonlight. White ring. Like bone." Jerome's eyes rolled back as he slipped into unconsciousness. Dr. Greaves pressed fingers to his neck. "Pulse is steady. He needs rest now." Reverend Dunn stood in the doorway, his tall frame casting a long shadow across the office floor. He'd heard everything. "A white ring," the Reverend said quietly. "The Charbonneau family crest. I've seen it at every baptism and funeral. Pure ivory, carved with sugar cane and crossed sabres. He removed his wire-rimmed glasses, cleaning them with shaking hands. Only the daughters wore them. It was tradition. And Josephine? Harrow asked. Would she have one? Dunn hesitated. The youngest girl, Colette. She was fond of Josephine, educated her in secret. Sometimes these old families would give favors to certain house servants, items of significance. He replaced his glasses, though such gifts often carried hidden meanings. Dr. Greaves finished bandaging Jerome's head. Sheriff, this man needs watching tonight. Those blows were precise. Whoever did this knew exactly how hard to hit without killing. Harrow nodded grimly. Post 2 deputies here, and send someone to fetch those estate ledgers again. We need to know exactly when Colette Charbonneau last visited the plantation. The evening bell of St. Landry Catholic Church rang across the parish as shadows stretched like dark fingers through the cypress trees. Inside the chapel, amber light filtered through stained glass, casting coloured patterns across the wooden pews where Reverend Dunn led the sunset mass. His son Timothy, a slight boy of 9 with sand-coloured hair, fidgeted beside him throughout the service. As the congregation filed out, Timothy tugged at his father's sleeve with unusual urgency. "Papa," he whispered, "I need to tell you something. About Miss Josephine." Dunn guided his son to a quiet corner near the confessional. "What is it, Timothy?" The boy's words tumbled out in a rush. "I saw her, Papa. Before the bad thing at the gin house. She was walking toward the cypress trees real early, before sunrise. Had this big wicker basket, like Mama used for wash day." Timothy's eyes grew wide, but she wasn't wearing any shoes. "When was this exactly?" Dunn asked, keeping his voice gentle. 3 days before the fire. I was up early to check my rabbit snares." Timothy lowered his voice further. "But there was something else, Papa. Something strange." He glanced around as if sharing a secret. There was smoke following her, like little grey clouds at her feet, but no fire anywhere. Dunn felt a chill despite the evening heat. "Are you certain about the smoke?" Timothy nodded vigorously. "Yes, sir. Like when you blow out a candle, but it kept following her steps." After sending Timothy home with their housekeeper, Dunn retreated to the church office. The baptismal registry from 1850 sat heavy in his hands, a leather-bound volume he'd referenced hundreds of times but never truly examined. He found the entry for December of that year, where the neat columns of names and dates showed signs of tampering. There, in faded brown ink, Josephine, daughter of... The surname had been scratched out with such force it left furrows in the paper. The following page had been completely rewritten, dated January 1851, with no mention of the entry. Dunn's hands trembled as he lit a second lamp. He knew these records, had maintained them faithfully since taking over the parish. But this alteration predated his tenure. The handwriting in the original entry belonged to Father Morris, his predecessor, now residing in a monastery near New Orleans. The sound of boots on wooden steps made him look up. Sheriff Harrow stood in the doorway, his usual pipe absent. "Evening, Reverend," Harrow said quietly. "Your boy just told my deputy quite a tale about smoke and bare feet." Dunn gestured to the open registry. "There's more, Daniel. Look here, a baptismal record, deliberately obscured." Someone went to great lengths to hide Josephine's parentage. Harrow examined the scratched-out text. "These church records, they're kept anywhere else. The diocese in Lafayette maintains copies of all parish registries." Dunn closed the book carefully. "If there was tampering here, the original entry might still be intact in their archives. "I'll need written authorization to access those records," Harrow said, already reaching for his notepad. "And Reverend? Keep your boy close. Seems he's got keen eyes, that one." Dunn nodded, glancing at the darkening windows, where cypress shadows swayed like beckoning fingers in the twilight breeze. The message arrived by courier just as Sheriff Harrow finished his morning coffee. The boy's horse was lathered with sweat, having ridden hard from St. Martin Parish through the muggy dawn hours. Harrow broke the seal and unfolded the wire transcript. 3 dead stop grain. Silo burned. Stop matches. Charbonneau. Case stop require immediate consultation. Stop within the hour. Harrow's buggy rattled east along the parish road. Doctor. Greaves beside him with his worn medical satchel. The sugar mill rose ahead of them, its brick walls stark against the morning sky. Sheriff Maurice Thibault of St. Martin Parish waited at the gate, his badge glinting dully in the sun. "Found them at first light," Thibault said, leading them through the yard. Mill workers came to load grain and smelled the burn. The silo's metal door hung open. Inside, 3 bodies lay twisted on the concrete floor, their flesh blackened by fire. Greaves knelt beside them, pulling on his wire-rimmed spectacles. "Lantern oil," he noted, sniffing the air, mixed with something else. Sweet, like burned molasses. Harrow examined the body's ankles, hemp rope, charred but distinctive in its weave. Same bindings as our gin house victims. "There's more," Thibault said, raising his lantern toward the wall. 3 letters stood out, carved deep into the metal. C.H. Greaves scraped soot samples into glass vials, while Harrow copied the initials into his logbook. The doctor held 1 vial to the light, squinting. "Remarkable consistency," he muttered. "The ash composition appears identical to what we found at Charbonneau's. See these crystalline fragments? Burned cane fiber, I'd wager. Used as an accelerant." "How long ago?" Harrow asked. "Given the body temperature and burn patterns, no more than 36 hours. A commotion outside drew their attention. A peddler stood in the yard, gesturing animatedly to Thibault's deputies. "Swear it was her," the man was saying as they approached. "That quiet Creole woman from the notices. Caught sight of her yesterday afternoon on the Plaquemine Road." Harrow stepped forward. "You're certain?" "Clear as day, Sheriff. She was sitting in Jeremiah Cole's supply cart, headed north, wearing a dark dress, hair up with some kind of silver comb. Didn't speak, just watched the road ahead." Greaves and Harrow exchanged glances. The doctor's fingers were stained with soot as he closed his satchel. "Telegraph office is 3 miles east," Thibault offered. "We can have notices out to every parish by nightfall." Harrow nodded, already composing the message in his head. He wrote quickly in his notepad, "Wanted. Josephine Charbonneau, Creole woman. Age approx. 29 medium height, slight build silver hair comb. Speaks refined French, last seen, northbound to Plaquemine. Approach with extreme caution, $100 reward for capture. Contact Sheriff D.L. Harrow, St. Landry Parish. Send it everywhere," he told Thibault. "Every township, every parish, churches, trading posts, river stations." He paused, looking back at the silo where Greaves still worked methodically among the dead. "And double the guard on that Charbonneau estate. Something tells me we haven't seen the last of this." Dawn's pink fingers barely touched the stained glass windows of St. John the Evangelist Church when Reverend Otis Green began his preparations for morning communion. He moved deliberately through his ritual, laying out the chalice, arranging the communion wafers, checking his vestments in the sacristy mirror. The early August heat already pressed against the windows, promising another sweltering Louisiana Sunday. The congregation filed in as the bell tolled 7, filling the worn wooden pews with familiar faces. Green knew them all: the Thibodeau family in their third-row pew, old widow Beauchamp with her prayer book, the Laurent children fidgeting in their Sunday best, which made the stranger in the back row all the more noticeable. She sat alone, head bowed beneath a black lace veil, hands folded primly in her lap. Her dress was simple but well made, marking her as neither wealthy nor destitute. Green had served long enough to recognize a traveler's careful anonymity. During communion, she approached the rail with measured steps. As she extended her hand for the host, Green caught the glint of metal, a silver ring bearing an intricate crest. His fingers faltered slightly. He had seen that design before, in parish correspondence with Saint. Landry, the Charbonneau family crest, distinctive in its crossed sugar-cane stalks and fleur-de-lis. "The body of Christ," he intoned, studying her face as she received the host. "Amen," she whispered, her French accent subtle but unmistakable. After the service, Green stationed himself by the door, shaking hands with departing parishioners. When the woman approached, he smiled warmly. "Welcome to St. John's." "I don't believe we've had the pleasure." "Mary Fournier," she replied softly. "I'm recently widowed, traveling south from Baton Rouge." "My condolences, Madame Fournier. Will you be staying in Plaquemine long?" "A few days, perhaps." "I have business with the cotton factors." Her hands were folded at her waist, the ring clearly visible. Green kept his expression neutral. "Please sign our visitor's registry before you go. We pray for all our travelers by name." She hesitated fractionally before taking the pen. Her signature flowed across the page in elegant script, too elegant for a cotton merchant's widow. Green watched her disappear into the morning crowd before returning to his office. The baptismal records filled a shelf of leather-bound volumes, meticulously maintained since the parish's founding. Green spent hours searching backwards through the years. No Mary Fournier, no Fournier family at all in Plaquemine or the surrounding parishes. By lamplight that evening, he composed his letter to Sheriff Harrow. "Dear Sheriff, a woman attended services today, bearing the Charbonneau crest ring. She gave the name Mary Fournier, claiming to be a widow from Baton Rouge, but our records show no such person. Her manner suggests education, possibly Creole heritage. Given recent events in your parish, I felt compelled to alert you. I have retained a sample of her writing from our visitor's registry for comparison." She indicated plans to remain in Plaquemine briefly. "Time may be of the essence. In Christ's service, Reverend Otis Greenstreet, John the Evangelist Church." He sealed the envelope and handed it to the evening courier, watching the rider disappear down the darkening road toward St. Landry Parish. In the church beyond his window, the candles still burned at the altar, their flames reflecting off the empty pews where Mary Fournier had sat that morning. Sheriff Harrow found Mary Fournier at the Plaquemine boarding house, seated at a writing desk near the window. She didn't look up when he entered, continuing to write in a leather-bound journal with steady strokes. "Josephine Charbonneau," he said, noting how her hand paused mid-word. "That's quite a distance from Saint. Landry Parish." She set down her pen and turned, revealing the silver ring that had betrayed her. "Sheriff Harrow, I wondered when you'd arrive. You're under arrest for identity fraud and suspected arson." He moved closer, watching for any sudden movements. "We'll need that ring as evidence." "Of course." She slipped it off without resistance and placed it on the desk. "Though I suspect you're more interested in what's in this journal." Two deputies flanked her as Harrow collected the ring and papers. The boarding-house keeper watched from the hallway, clutching her apron, as they led Josephine out. In the parish jail cell, Josephine sat perfectly straight on the wooden bench, hands folded in her lap, as if at Sunday service. Through the barred window, afternoon light cast shadows across her face. 23 men, she said, when Harrow pulled up his chair. Their weight still presses on the earth. We found 14 bodies in the gin house. Did you? Her voice carried no emotion. The earth holds more than you've counted, Sheriff. Dr. Greaves arrived with a yellowed document retrieved from the shuttered schoolhouse near the Charbonneau estate. A teacher's affidavit from 1859, he explained, spreading it on the desk, confirming Josephine's education alongside the Charbonneau children. The affidavit detailed her progress in French, English, and mathematics, signed by a Miss Adelaide Porter. Below were samples of Josephine's childhood penmanship, flowing script that matched both the burned list from the tin case and her recent journal entries. "Write them down," Harrow said, sliding paper and pen through the bars. "Every name you remember." Josephine took up the pen with the same steady hand they'd observed at the boarding-house. For nearly an hour, the only sound was ink scratching paper as she wrote, each name in perfect script. Samuel Lorne, Elias Brand, Wallace Lichter, Thomas Cole, Herbert Mason. The list continued, 23 names in total. Harrow compared them to his own records. 14 matched the identified remains from the gin house. "And the others?" he asked. Josephine looked up from the paper, her gaze direct. "Ask the freedmen who worked their fields. They remember where each man fell." Dr. Greaves studied the handwriting samples side by side, the schoolgirl's careful letters, the burned list's accusations, and now this calm catalogue of the dead. "Perfect matches," he confirmed, no attempt to disguise the hand. "Why would I hide it?" Josephine's voice remained level. "Truth leaves its own marks." Harrow gathered the evidence, the ring, the affidavit, the confession, into his case file. Judge Baird would want witnesses. The freedmen who'd survived the overseer's rule would have their say at last. "You'll face public deposition," he told her. "Those who worked the plantation will testify." "Good," Josephine said, turning back to the window. "Let them speak of what they saw. Let them tell of the weight they carried." The Lafayette Parish Courthouse filled before dawn. Farmers, merchants, and freedmen crowded the wooden benches, their whispers echoing off the high ceiling. Judge Ephraim Baird adjusted his spectacles as the first witness approached the stand. Marcus Webb, a freedman of 43 years, gripped the railing with work-worn hands. "Samuel Lorne, he took our rations," he testified, voice trembling. "Said we hadn't met quota. Children went hungry while he fed fresh beef to his dogs." The courthouse scribe's pen scratched against paper, recording every word. Sarah Collins, barely 20, spoke next. Tears streaked her face as she described Elias Brand's weekly inspections of the women's quarters. He'd come at night, if any tried to stop him. She pulled back her sleeve, revealing rope scars on her wrist. Judge Baird's gavel cracked against wood when murmurs rose from the gallery. Etienne Charbonneau, seated in the front row, stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched. Isaiah Turner, who'd worked the press gang, described Wallace Lichter's practice of chaining men together during storms. Lightning struck the gin once. 3 couldn't get free, burned alive while he watched from the porch. The fourth witness, John Freeman, had been a field hand since childhood. "They'd beat us for looking up from the cane," he said. "Brand kept a tally in his book. Each lash earned him extra pay from Mr. Charbonneau threw out the door testimony." Josephine sat motionless at the defendant's table, her face unchanged as each horror unfolded. Only her hands, folded in her lap, showed tension, knuckles white against a dark skin. "I was in the trap," William Porter testified, his voice barely above a whisper. "Lorne caught me teaching my boy his letters. Said he'd make an example." He paused, swallowing hard. Was down there 3 days before a woman's hand reached through the dark. Unlocked the chains at midnight. Never saw her face, but she smelled of smoke and roses. The sixth witness, Mary Beth Johnson, had served in the main house. "Miss Josephine kept records," she said. "Every beating, every theft, she faltered, every girl that disappeared into the overseer's quarters, all written in that little book she carried." The final testimony came from Samuel Wells, who'd dug the foundation for the new gin house. "They made us build that trap," he said. "Said it was for storing sugar. But the chains were there from the start. And Mr. Charbonneau, he supervised every bolt. Judge Baird ordered a recess, then announced his ruling. Full excavation of the gin house site, with every bone and shackle to be catalogued by an independent notary from New Orleans. As deputies led Josephine from the courtroom, Dr. Greaves approached the bench with urgent news. The initial dig had already yielded results. 2 bodies lay in the deepest part of the pit, flesh still intact. "These men died after the fires," he reported. "Someone's been using that trap since Josephine fled north." The judge examined the preliminary sketches, noting the fresh rope marks and absence of burns. "Keep digging," he ordered, "and post additional guards at the site." Josephine, pausing at the doorway, finally broke her silence with a single sentence. "Count every bone." Thunder rolled across St. Landry Parish as rain pelted the Charbonneau Manor's tin roof. Sheriff Harrow stood in the entrance hall, watching water seep through floorboards warped by summer heat. Something about the buckling pattern caught his eye. "Dr. Greaves," he called to the physician, examining ledgers in the study. "Bring your probe." The iron rod struck hollow beneath a particular board, echoing differently than the surrounding floor. 3 deputies pried up the planks, revealing a narrow space that shouldn't have existed, a gap between the foundation stones. "Lantern," Harrow ordered, kneeling at the edge. The beam illuminated pale fingers first, clutching what appeared to be a candle stub. As they widened the opening, Colette Charbonneau's face emerged from the darkness, her eyes open but unseeing, her black hair matted with clay. Dr. Greaves descended carefully into the crawl space. "No more than 2 days dead," he noted, examining the body. "'Cause appears to be—" He paused, lifting her hand. "Sheriff, look at this." The candle stub was streaked with blood, and Colette's left ring finger was cleanly severed, the same finger that would have worn the family crest ring, now tied to Josephine. "Deliberate cut," Greaves confirmed. "Not torn." Someone wanted that ring. Deputy Morris emerged from the study with a half-burned paper, recovered from behind a loose brick in the hearth. "Found this, sir." Matches the paper from the tin case. Harrow held it to the light. Through the char marks, a single column of names remained visible, written in the same delicate script as the other fragments. Near the bottom, a lone initial stood out, C, followed by the word just. "She was helping her," Harrow said quietly. "Colette was part of it." Etienne Charbonneau's voice boomed from the doorway. "My daughter would never—" "Your daughter," Harrow cut in, "kept her own records." He produced a small leather notebook found in Colette's dress pocket. "Names, dates, violations by your overseers. She witnessed everything." The notebook fell open to a page dated April 12th. "Samuel Lorne beat Marcus Webb's boy today. Father approved the punishment. I cannot remain silent." She gave Josephine the ring, Harrow continued, provided access to the estate ledgers, maybe even helped lure the overseers to the gin house. He turned to face Etienne, but something changed. She became a liability. Dr. Greaves called up from the crawl space. "Sheriff?" "There's something else." He lifted Colette's other hand, revealing a torn piece of paper clutched in her rigid fingers. "Looks like part of a letter. The paper contained only a fragment. Must tell what I know. The truth about fathers." Harrow looked at Etienne Charbonneau, whose face had gone ashen. "Where are the estate records from March, Mr. Charbonneau? The ones showing payments to overseers for additional duties?" "I don't—" "Deputies," Harrow interrupted. "Arrest Mr. Charbonneau for obstruction of justice and destruction of evidence." He held up Colette's notebook. "And send word to Judge Baird. We've got 20 pages here detailing exactly how this plantation was run." As they led Etienne away in irons, Doctor, Greaves supervised the careful removal of Colette's body. The rain continued to pour through the open floorboards, washing away years of accumulated dust and revealing, at last, the rot beneath the Charbonneau estate's polished facade. Sheriff Harrow's boots creaked on the narrow attic stairs of the Charbonneau manor. Morning light filtered through gaps in the roof slats, illuminating dust motes and cobwebs. The space smelled of mildew and old paper. "Careful with those boxes, Morris," he called to his deputy. "Everything's evidence now." They had been searching since dawn, methodically working through decades of plantation records. The attic held hundreds of crates and trunks, each filled with ledgers, correspondence, and contracts spanning the estate's history. Morris lifted a water-stained box from beneath a broken window. "Sheriff?" "This one's different." The box's lid bore a single word in precise script. "Oversight." Harrow recognized the handwriting immediately. The same careful strokes found on the burned list from the tin case. Josephine's hand. Inside, beneath layers of cotton batting, lay a leather-bound register. Its spine was marked with 6 precise notches, one for each overseer. The pages inside were immaculate, showing none of the hasty scratches common to plantation records. "Get Dr. Greaves," Harrow ordered, "and send word to Judge Baird." An hour later, they gathered in the estate's dining room. Harrow spread the register across the polished mahogany where the Charbonneaus had hosted so many elegant dinners. "Look at the precision, Doctor," Greaves murmured, adjusting his spectacles. "Every entry dated, every incident logged." The first page listed Samuel Lorne's arrival from Mississippi, January 12, 1868. Below his name stretched columns of infractions, each one detailed in Josephine's meticulous hand. February 3rd, whipped Marcus Webb's son, age 9, for dropping sugar cane. 20 lashes. Child unable to work 3 days. February 17th, withheld rations from Thompson family after refusing Sunday shift. Children went hungry 4 days. Beside each entry was a tiny red dot, no larger than a pinprick. "The dots," Morris said. "They match the names we found in the pit." Harrow nodded grimly. She documented everything, waited until she had proof against all 6. They turned pages slowly. Wallace Lichter's arrival in February, Elias Brand in March, each name followed by columns of cruelty, each marked with those patient red dots. "There's more, Doctor," Greaves said, indicating fine script at the bottom of each page. "Look at these notations." In margins and corners, Josephine had added precise measurements, distances from gin house to quarters, guard rotation schedules, calculations of rope strength, and pulley mechanics. "She planned it for months," Harrow said. "Waited until all 23 were accounted for." The final page held a list of names, match for match with the charred bodies found beneath the gin house floor. Beside each name was a date, a crime, and a single word: justice. Judge Baird arrived as they finished their review. He examined the register in silence, then spoke. "This is not just a confession, gentlemen. It's an indictment." "Of the overseers?" Morris asked. "Of the entire system," Baird replied. "But the law cannot account for motive, however documented. This will be entered as evidence at tomorrow's hearing." Harrow watched the judge trace those red dots with a weathered finger. "And the sentence?" "The court must answer murder with justice," Baird said, "even when justice wears a darker face than we might wish." He closed the register carefully. "Execution order will be issued for October 14th. God have mercy on her soul." Dr. Greaves gathered his notes. "And what of these records? The testimony they contain?" "File them," Baird ordered. "Every page. Let history judge what drove a woman to such terrible arithmetic." Grey. Light crept over Lafayette Parish Courthouse as the first roosters called from distant farms. Frost glazed the grass, unusual for October, making each blade brittle and sharp. Sheriff Harrow stood at the base of the newly constructed gallows, watching his breath form clouds in the cold air. Dr. Greaves checked his pocket watch. 5:30. Time to proceed. A small crowd had gathered despite the early hour. Freedmen from neighboring parishes, officials required by law, and a cluster of field hands who'd walked through the night from St. Landry. They stood silent, heads bowed against the chill. The courthouse door opened. 2 deputies led Josephine onto the wooden platform. She wore a simple cotton dress, pressed and clean, her silver comb still nested in her coiled hair. Her steps were steady, neither hurried nor hesitant. Reverend Dunn approached with his Bible. "Child, will you not take comfort in prayer?" Josephine's eyes, dark and unblinking, fixed on the horizon. She gave no response. Sheriff Harrow unfolded the official document. "Josephine Charbonneau, you have been found guilty of 23 counts of murder by fire. Do you wish to make any final statement before sentence is carried out?" She turned slightly, regarding the crowd with that same unreadable expression she'd worn in the Charbonneau kitchen so many mornings. When she spoke, her voice carried clearly in the still air. "The earth does not grieve the ash." Dr. Greaves recorded the words in his leather-bound notebook, noting the time, 5:42 a.m. The executioner, brought in from New Orleans, positioned the rope with mechanical precision. The hemp was new, tested for strength, measured to specifications. Josephine stood motionless as it settled around her neck. At 5:45, the courthouse bell began to toll. One clear note rang out. Then a sharp crack split the morning silence. The rope had snapped clean through, as if cut by an invisible blade. Josephine fell to her knees on the platform. Before anyone could move, she rose smoothly to her feet. For a moment, she stood tall, face turned east toward the rising sun. The second rope, when properly secured, held. Dr. Greaves marked the time of death as 5:47 a.m. The crowd dispersed quietly, leaving only the officials to handle final arrangements. That afternoon, storm clouds gathered over Lafayette Parish. The rain began at dusk and continued for days, turning fields to mud and swelling the creeks past their banks. 3 weeks later, after the heaviest downpour, a field hand from the Charbonneau plantation came running into Sheriff Harrow's office. The floods had carved deep gullies through the cane fields, exposing what lay beneath. Harrow rode out with Doctor Greaves through the rain. Near the eastern edge of the property, where young cane once grew, water had washed away layers of soil. 3 shallow graves emerged from the mud, their occupants bound in rotting burlap. Dr. Greaves knelt in the muck, examining the remains. "These weren't among the 23, he said quietly. "Different binding method. Older decomposition." Harrow stared at the exposed graves, remembering Josephine's final words. The rain fell steadily, turning ash and earth to black mud that stained everything it touched. 26, he murmured, marking the number in his wet notebook. The final count is 26. Sleet peppered the windows of Tulane University's archive room as Professor Marcus Whitfield sorted through the newly arrived evidence boxes from Lafayette Parish. Steam rose from his coffee cup, fighting against the December chill that crept through the building's old bones. Each item from the Charbonneau case had been carefully wrapped in brown paper and twine. The charred tin case, fragments of rope, the estate ledger with its torn pages, and Dr. Greaves's detailed notebooks. Whitfield catalogued them methodically, his pencil scratching against fresh index cards. Item 23F, he muttered, examining the tin case under his brass lamp. Significant fire damage along lower edge. Contains partial list of names, written in French-influenced script. Page count indicates 1 sheet missing from sequence. His assistant, Sarah Morton, held up the case to the lamplight. "Look here, Professor. The binding shows 24 original folds, but we only have 23 pages." They spread the surviving documents across the oak table. The handwriting flowed elegantly across each sheet, naming victims and crimes with methodical precision. But between pages 16 and 18, there was an unmistakable gap in the narrative. A knock at the door interrupted their examination. Elizabeth Dane, the university's head librarian, entered with a letter in hand. "This just arrived from St. Martinville Parish," she said, passing it to Whitfield. "They've been reviewing their school records from the period." Whitfield adjusted his spectacles and read aloud. "Records show unauthorized alterations to attendance logs and baptismal certificates dating from 1865 to 1868. Several entries appear to have been modified by someone with access to official documentation, possibly a teacher or clerk familiar with parish systems." "There's more," Elizabeth said, pointing to the second page. "They found evidence that a schoolteacher named Marie Gautier had been helping freedmen alter their papers." She disappeared shortly after Josephine's arrest. Sarah carefully lifted another document from the evidence box, a partially burned letter written in the same elegant script as the tin case list. "Professor, look at this formation of letters. The way the M curves, it matches samples we have from the parish schoolhouse." Whitfield nodded slowly. "Two hands working together. One inside the house, one moving through official channels, but we'll never know for certain without that missing page." The following week, workers attempting to demolish the old gin house reported strange occurrences. The new trap door they'd installed to seal the pit wouldn't stay closed. Each morning they found it hanging open, no matter how securely they latched it the night before. Children playing near the abandoned Charbonneau fields whispered stories about smoke rising from the cane rows on windless nights. They claimed to see a woman walking barefoot through the stalks when the sugar burned too fast in the remaining mills, her steps leaving ash in the soil. The missing page was never recovered. Some claimed Marie Gautier took it when she fled, protecting other names that might have been written there. Others insisted Josephine had one final secret that burned with her that October morning. Professor Whitfield's official catalogue entry, preserved in Tulane's archives, reads simply, "Item 23F, page 17. Status, missing. Contents unknown. Case remains incomplete." Below this, in faded ink, someone later added, "La flamme de la nuit keeps her silence still."